What's the status of the conflict with Iran? What are 26 attorneys general suing about this time? How much is it costing taxpayers to prosecute animal rights activists? And what are these inflationary pressures? Welcome to the States, powered by the Center Square. It's Monday, July 27th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. After nearly 2 weeks straight of strikes against Iran, the U.S. hasn't struck Iranian targets in 3 days. What has that done to the price of energy? Well, AAA shows that the regular cost for a regular gallon of gas is $4.11, and that's actually unchanged from Sunday, but it's up 4 cents from last week. Last month, it was at $3.87, and last year at this time, it was at $3.14. We'll talk a lot more about the economic impacts from energy prices when we share a conversation we had with PhD economist Orphe Divounguy later in the show. But energy is just one element in this ongoing developing story. There's the taxpayer cost of the war, worth tens of billions of dollars, and the lives of U.S. military personnel at stake. There's also the stability in the overall Middle East region, all at stake. Now, previous strikes against Iran, they were aimed at targeting military strike sites that were being used to attack commercial cargo vessels passing through the very important Strait of Hormuz. The Center Square, Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief Sarah Roderick Fitch reports a full naval blockade is in effect and has been so for the last couple of weeks, something meant to squeeze Iran and the IRGC economically, costing the Iranian regime up to $500,000 a day. Now, Iran is already experiencing record high inflation, and now it is worse as Iran and the RIGC are reportedly having trouble paying their bills. Now, President Donald Trump has said that the U.S. will strike Pickaxe Mountain. It's a highly fortified nuclear facility, which was struck in June 2025 when the U.S. targeted Iran's nuclear facilities. The administration is saying that the pause in strikes is to allow diplomacy to work. Now, the president maintains talks remain ongoing with Iran even as the strikes were ongoing. The president says the U.S. is locked and loaded as more assets move closer to the region if the U.S. opts on a full-scale strike targeting Iran's infrastructure and energy sites. Now, joining us to discuss this more in detail in the latest in Iran is Marty Yousefiani. He's director of the Iran Freedom Project. Marty, it's a pleasure meeting you, and thank you for taking time here with the States. What's the latest you're hearing from over the weekend from Iran?
Thank you for having me. Yes, as we've been observing, it appears that the United States' approach has been a strategic pause for the past few nights, and I think that is designed, first of all, to signal and to reposition some of the diplomatic posturing and back and forth that is taking place in Europe and Oman and elsewhere. And secondly, positioning some of the assets required for what the president has promised to possibly be Epic Fury 2. So it's a standby pause with the world holding its breath to see what might come next.
You know, what are you hearing about the possibility of the IRGC looking to import militants from Afghanistan and even Iraq to join this fight?
Yeah, well, unfortunately in terms of the perspective of the Iranian people, this is not new. Only the West is, for the first time, paying attention to it. The Iranian regime has done this in the past, importing, fighters, mercenaries, if you will, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from Syria, and previously even from Hezbollah of Lebanon. So that has been something that they have employed simply because it's part of their calculus, worrying about the domestic inability of really retaining those suppressive forces that at some point they fear will be reluctant to shoot upon their brothers and sisters in the neighborhoods that they live. So this has been done before, and regretfully, it is not a surprise to the Iranian people.
Now, obviously, the conflict between the U.S. and Iran, Israel is a part of this conversation, Lebanon as well. But what about Russia and China? What role are they playing in this, and what concerns do you have?
Yeah, well, the Russian and Chinese and even the North Korean contingents have been elements that the Iranian people have been watching very, very carefully. Of course, they're all very cautious and careful not to cross certain lines. And so far, I think what is being done, in as much as they can get away with, is sharing intelligence and in some cases, some hard assets in terms of satellite and perhaps even some suppressive tools that the regime has been using, like artificial intelligence assessment and reading of the protesters and so forth. But yes, both Russia and China have been hands on supporting in terms of their desire to see the Tehran regime upstand, but at the same time they recognize that they cannot really engage in a forceful way because of the various strategic needs that they have in terms of their relations with Washington.
We've heard the president and other Trump administration officials talk about the multiple layers of leadership that they've obliterated, according to the president. But what are you hearing about those other members within the IRGC? Are there any defections that are notable?
Well, of course, under these conditions, there's enormous pressure, political pressure, economic pressure that the regime collectively is withstanding. We are seeing the formation of, at least it's much more nuanced and detailed than that, but for simple terms and for the audience to understand, there is in fact formation of two camps inside Iran: those who favor a more militant approach, a messianic, if you will, approach of taking it to the end. What may come does not matter to them. And then you have the other camp, which are really motivated for self-preservation in terms of their own heads, as well as vast financial empires that they control, meaning that camp would favor some form of a diplomatic solution so that they can sustain the regime in itself. So those two camps, while forming, are putting a lot of pressure domestically within the military as well as political infrastructure in Iran. It's a matter of time where they may be pushed to actually take positions on that, but it is real. It is something that the Washington and European political sort of negotiators must keep an eye on and try to see where they can to at least encourage this rift. But it is definitely a serious formation of a fissure. Something needs to be really carefully looked at.
As that's continuing to be part of the equation here about possible defections within the IRGC, what about the citizenry in Iran? Is there a movement to bring about more freedom in that country, to push back against some of the hardliners within the government?
There's no question the Iranian people have courageously, the 92 million Iranians have courageously for the past 47 years, progressively at each turn, have demonstrated to the regime itself and to the world through the various protests and waves of acts of defiance that we have seen, the latest being this past January and February, where we saw hundreds of thousands, millions come into the streets to tell the regime as well as to the world that they reject the Islamist regime of Iran. So there's no question there. The Iranian people overwhelmingly, I think at 85, 90%, I think according to the regime's own internal surveys, defy and reject the form of Islamist governance that has really not paid off at all. The Iranian people are suffering financially, socially, politically. Every measurable data point that you look at, the Iranian people are suffering today. So there's no question there. It's just a matter of if and when they can overcome the suppressive capacity of the regime. We saw that the regime will respond to defiance and protest through bullets and mass arrests. That is what is holding the Iranian people back. If that was not there, the regime would not be standing today.
One of the major goals of the Trump administration, as he said over and over again, is Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Where is that in this overall conversation? What's the status there?
Well, the nuclear capacity and desire and ambitions of the regime have been at the forefront of every single U.S. administration and European policymakers. That stands. I think the regime has demonstrated that it cannot be trusted with such a capability. And what the 12-day Israeli strike, as well as the Epic Fury 1, accomplished, at least for now, was, as according to the president, the nuclear dust at least has been shut down beneath the rubble. The point is the Iranian regime's capacity to access that and to rebuild. For now, that is under control, but that is something that will not be allowed, cannot be allowed, I think, universally and regionally, as well as the Iranian people recognize that is a capability the regime cannot be trusted with. And so I don't think that there's any flexibility there.
And Marty, finally here, as we see this continue on now, several months into it, it's a lot of people waiting to see what happens in the days ahead. But who do you think should be calling the shots in Iran? Who in the country can rise up to work with the Trump administration on any kind of cooperation to get out of this?
Well, the simple answer to that is the Iranian people. The simple answer to that is that the Iranian people are the most important ally the world, the West, United States has, the region has. They are the most pro-Western, among the best educated, have high affinity for Western values. They basically want nothing different than our boys and girls here in the West desire a better life. So when you have a population that desires that, which falls directly in contrast to the regime, which has been pursuing militancy and isolation, our biggest asset is the Iranian people. Who, where, why, and how that can come into the fold is what we're looking at right now. And the biggest recommendation, the most important recommendation would be to invest in the Iranian people. The civil society that exists there has a long tradition, which the West has not really been paying attention to. Civil society in Iran has a tradition of 50, 60 years that is there, ready, able, and willing. It just needs nurturing, attention, patronage. And I think as a result of that, we will see elements and strong political spheres of influence that can and will take charge, hopefully the day after this regime falls.
Marty Yousefiani, director of the Iran Freedom Project, greatly appreciate you taking the time here for the States. We'll keep you updated on that story and more at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more. "26 states have sued in federal courts the Trump administration, aimed at stopping them from withholding federal funds, specifically billions of dollars in federal counterterrorism and other funds, to get states to comply with election integrity efforts." Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. The attorneys general say DHS and FEMA, they established grant conditions for the 2026 funding cycle that has the states follow conditions to access over $1 billion in Homeland Security grant program funds that states use to support security measures and protect residents from terrorism, cyber attacks, and more. An example of some of this funding, at least in Illinois, the state receives over $40 million in Homeland Security program funding each year for state and municipal efforts to prevent, prepare, and respond to acts of terrorism. Now, specifically, the attorneys general say that the challenged funding conditions would require states to transition to paper ballot systems, conduct a mandatory 5% manual audit of voting systems, reconcile voters and ballots using a methodology that DHS AGs say have not disclosed, and use DHS's systemic alien verification for entitlements system to verify the citizenship of every election worker and every registered voter in the state's voter database. Now, if states do not comply with these measures, DHS and FEMA will withhold at least 20% of each state's HSGP funding. Again, the lawsuit alleges unlawful conditions for freezing these funds, and they are requiring transition to paper ballot system, use of the SAVE system. They want audits of the voter rolls and election systems, and they want transmitted lists of registered voters to DHS, and they want DHS to assist local law enforcement in federal immigration enforcement. Now, the AGs asserts that these requirements would force states to abandon years of work and millions of dollars in taxpayer investments in their election systems, all to obtain what they say is unrelated funding that Congress earmarked for the prevention of terrorist attacks. But what is that SAVE system that is part of the requirements to access this funding, part of this lawsuit? Well, DHS says that the SAVE system is an online service administered by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Enforcement that provides point-in-time immigration status and U.S. citizenship information to federal, state, local, territorial, and tribal agencies. Now, DHS says SAVE is fast, secure, and reliable, and it enables registered users to make accurate decisions for applicants seeking benefits and licenses. There's over 1,300 agencies nationwide already using SAVE, and in fiscal year 2025, DHS says SAVE processed 198 million cases. They say what SAVE does verifies a benefit or license application for immigration status or U.S. citizenship, including naturalized, acquired, and U.S.-born citizenship for user agencies to get that information within seconds. They also say that SAVE helps ensure that only applicants who are eligible for benefits and licenses receive them. They also say it incorporates privacy principles and security measures into those agencies' processes and procedures. Now, what they say the SAVE does not do, and this again is the program that DHS is promoting states use in order to get some funds from the federal government. They say what SAVE does not do is it does not determine applicant eligibility for a specific benefit or license, and that determination is made by the benefit issuing or licensing agency that's using the program. They also say that the SAVE program does not provide employment eligibility verification. For more information on that, go to E-Verify. But they also say that the SAVE program does not share information provided by user agencies for administrative immigration enforcement purposes. Now, the White House has said, and we talked about this last week, New Jersey Governor Mickey Sherrill, she admitted that there was a software glitch in New Jersey that led to around 6,600 non-citizens getting registered to vote, and the White House says hundreds of them actually cast ballots. Again, non-citizens casting ballots. In that news release, the White House said, and this is a direct result of Democrat policies that refuse basic citizenship checks, and exactly why Congress must pass the Save America Act. And as you can see, that graphic of states that have used the SAVE program, they're finding not just deceased voters on voter rolls, they're finding non-citizens on those voter rolls. Now, the White House also pushing the Save America Act, and that's that piece of legislation that would require voter ID and a variety of other things the White House calls safeguards. And they say that New Jersey has refused to implement those. The White House has been very critical of other states as well not implementing these various protocols. Now, the White House said every illegal ballot dilutes the voice of lawful American citizens and undermines election integrity. And they say that these incidents are not random errors. They claim that they are predictable results of Democrat policies that refuse to verify citizenship. Now, again, these 26 different states' attorneys general, they're suing the federal government to access these federal funds that the federal government is saying you can't have access to unless you help with election security and integrity. But among those 26 states suing, Arizona, California, Colorado, Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, North Carolina, Washington, Wisconsin, and many others. Is your state among those? What do you think about this lawsuit? Leave a comment below. We'll be right back with more from the states. viewer discretion advised. This story deals with allegations of animal abuse.
Spending endless taxpayer dollars to try to arrest people for trying to help dogs, I think, is a pretty crazy prospect.
That's surveillance video of a vehicle being driven through the main gate of a now defunct dog breeder Ridglan in Wisconsin, followed by Liam Gray, executive director of the Wilberforce Institute. The story? Well, it might cost taxpayers as much as $5 million to prosecute about 50 animal rights activists who attempted to take beagles from a breeder accused of abusing them. Let's bring in the Center Square investigative reporter Jared Strong for more. Jared, one of the arrested activists in this story, they have a trial that's set for January. What's behind the charges in this story?
Well, thanks for having me, Greg. For years, animal rights activists have claimed abuse by Ridglan Farms in Wisconsin, which at any given time typically had several thousand beagles it was breeding for sale for research. It had been operating since the 1960s. So beagles are used for research because they're small, they're easygoing and trusting. They're used, for example, to test drugs and chemicals for human and other animals' safety. Now, former Ridglan employees had said they had witnessed abuse of the dogs, but local law enforcement had apparently declined to investigate. That led some of the activists to go directly to a circuit court judge who has the power to order an investigation, and that's what happened early last year. A special prosecutor was appointed to look into it, and he found that there was evidence to bring felony abuse charges against Ridglan. And that led Ridglan to agree to abandon its breeding operation, which concluded just in recent weeks. But there were many months that passed as Ridglan wound down its operations, during which the beagle advocates worried about ongoing abuse, and they staged 2 rescues in March and April. They broke into Ridglan, took more than a dozen dogs in March, and that led to felony burglary and theft charges against about 4 dozen people that were filed early this month.
Now, Jared, again, let's look a little bit at the Ridglan investigation. In early 2025, as you reported, a judge did agree that evidence supports cruelty charges and said that the district attorney failed to issue a complaint. But then, as some of these cases tend to play out, they go and tap a different prosecutor from maybe a neighboring county or elsewhere, and they become a special prosecutor. But even that special prosecutor went about and withheld those charges. Why did that special prosecutor decide, you know what, we're not going to use the full force of the prosecutorial system to go after this farm, despite what a judge said?
Yeah, well, the special prosecutor who was appointed, it was La Crosse County District Attorney Tim Grinke. He's talked at length about this publicly and in his report to the judge. He said it was the most expeditious way to ensure the safety of the dogs. He said, a prosecution might have taken more than a year and didn't have a guaranteed outcome. He felt that this path would remedy the situation and best serve the general public and taxpayers.
Jared, the story gets a bit graphic when you talk about some of the things that were alleged to have been taking place behind those fences. But if you can, explain what some of those alleged procedures being done against these beagles were.
Yeah, well, the special prosecutor found that there was credible evidence that Ridglan had unqualified workers perform surgeries to correct what's known as cherry eye. It's a somewhat common problem that happens when a beagle's eye gland dislodges and becomes exposed. Now, the best way to fix it is to tuck that gland back into place. That ensures that it'll keep producing tears to keep the eye moist. But Ridglan had its workers cut the gland off without using anesthesia, it was alleged. So they'd pull a dog out of its enclosure, snip off the gland, and put the dog back. Former workers said that the dogs appeared to be in significant pain and that other dogs would lick the blood from their wounds. The former workers also said that Ridglan employees would cut the back of the dogs' throats to damage their vocal cords to make their barks quieter. But those allegations were old enough that they exceeded the statute of limitations and couldn't be prosecuted. But the Cherry Eye procedures were well documented by Ridglan itself, which is why they could have led to charges.
And you even reported that there were employees who blew the whistle on these things. Now, you attempted to contact Ridglan. You did not get a statement back from them, but they did say on their website that there's no credible evidence of animal abuse, cruelty, mistreatment, or neglect at Ridglan Farms has ever been presented or substantiated. Now, again, that special prosecutor not advancing charges. But let's talk about the activists in this case. Now, there were two different attempts, as you said, to retrieve these dogs. 4 people facing felony burglary and theft charges from that March break-in. Unclear what's going to happen with the attempt in April, where they were met by law enforcement who were ready. But Ridglan provided photos and video of not just that vehicle we've seen in the frame here every once in a while, breaking through the fence, but also they posted what were called burglary, or rather break-in tools. Looks like a circular saw of sorts, different types of drills, and things along those lines. Now, those burglary charges, pretty severe, punishable by up to 12.5 years in prison. Is there any sense of accountability amongst the activists in this story?
Yeah, I mean, they weren't hiding what they were trying to do. These rescues were, that they call them, were well publicized. I mean, in the second one, there was a heavy law enforcement presence waiting for them to come. So the activists, the beagle advocates, they say that the fault really lies with the Dane County Attorney's Office, because it failed to investigate Ridglan despite their repeated pleas over the years. And even though there was an agreement in place to get the dogs out of there, they were justified to stage the rescues because of the fear of ongoing abuse.
Yeah, and you talked with a litigation fellow for the Animal Activist Legal Defense Project, Stephen Seitz, and he said that they're eager to go to trial, saying that they think that they did morally just things, and they also believe they're legally right. Here's a little bit of what he had to tell you.
The law does give various affirmative defenses. And I think sort of intuitively, we're all familiar with the idea of like a dog trapped in a hot car. I can't ordinarily go around breaking windows, but if there's a dog or a child in the back of a car who's overheating, then I can take emergency action and break someone's window and save that dog or that child. And I think this is sort of that on a much larger, more extreme scale. There's ongoing animal cruelty going on. No one is willing to do anything.
Now, obviously, that's an argument that could very well be in front of a jury with a trial that could start as early as January. So just in a handful of months here. How much is this going to cost taxpayers? Not just, the amount used to respond to these activists encroaching upon the farm here, but also to prosecute these individuals.
Well, it's kind of a hard figure to pin down. One of the activists who was arrested, he's also an attorney, and he estimated that it would cost more than $100,000 per person to prosecute, each one of those defendants. So, I mean, do the math on that, that's potentially millions of dollars. The county attorney's office didn't respond to our request to give their own estimate or respond to his estimate. Federal surveys have shown that felony prosecutions often cost less than $10,000. That's skewed a little bit in this context because, the vast majority of those prosecutions result in either plea deals or dismissals, not trials, which are much more expensive. And then on top of that, there might be appeals that drive up the cost.
Jared, your story highlights, not just those concerns that the activists who are charged with crimes have about the taxpayer cost and about the lives and safety of these beagles, but also seems to highlight that dichotomy between actions taken against the activists to hold them accountable for showing up to a private property with burglary tools and using a vehicle to smash through a gate. But contrasting that with whatever actions were taken against the dog breeder, what did the Dane County Sheriff's Office have to say about that perception of this dichotomy?
Well, they didn't respond to our interview requests, including, how much they spent to respond, especially to that second rescue. Like I said, there was a heavy law enforcement presence, multiple departments. But the sheriff's office does keep information on its website explaining its response in this situation. They basically say that they responded to the immediate criminal activity of the activists at Ridglan Farms, and that investigations into the operation of Ridglan itself are better suited to state or federal government regulators rather than local law enforcement. They emphasized that they were not trying to protect animal cruelty, as people had complained at length about.
And they said that the office enforces laws as written and operates within clearly defined legal boundaries. Jared, a fascinating story, and something I think we'll definitely want to watch as the trial for at least one activist is expected to start in January. So we'll look for updates on this story and more. Appreciate your time here with the States. As consumers head to the grocery store every week or fill up at the pump, they be making decisions based on how they see prices going up. But do they understand the global picture on the economy? How a stable labor market just put inflation back into the driver's seat? Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. For Everyday Economics this week, I talked with PhD economist Orphe Divounguy about how the labor market stopped being the Fed's biggest worry. The labor market stopped being the Fed's biggest worry. Unemployment is steady at about 4.2%. It's very low layoffs. Got that and the June jobs numbers not tipping into broader weakness. That dual mandate of maximum employment and stable prices seemingly flipped. Now, inflation risks are the dominant concern heading into this week's FOMC meeting. Walk us through the latest labor market data and what exactly this is doing to the Feds and the risks that there are about being broadly balanced.
Yeah, no, all of 2025, we basically had almost no jobs created, right? The labor market looked softer and looked like it was deteriorating. And so we began 2026 asking when the Fed would cut. Now markets are debating whether or not it might hike. You've mentioned the mandate, right? It's maximum employment, stable prices. And ultimately, if the labor market is not collapsing or even deteriorating anymore, and the unemployment rate remains pretty low, then the concern has to shift to the other side of the mandate, which is inflation. We got war, we got tariffs, we got federal deficits that are pushing inflation higher. We got that big AI investment boom. All of them push inflation up, not down, and so the Fed has to react appropriately.
So, what does that reaction look like? Is the reaction making things tighter, or are they able to ease things and possibly lower interest rates or increase interest rates?
Yeah, I mean, inflation's moving up, and so when inflation moves up, the reaction is to raise interest rates, right? And so that's what it looks like right now. Of course, I've been making the argument for a while now that potentially the supply shocks that we got, right, the big increase in oil prices could be disinflationary. What do I mean by that? It's a tax on households, right? So I have to pay more to for the food, the transportation, the food, the deliveries, everything that shows up at my front door, is facing a price increase, and that price increase in an environment where people are not able to get a raise is ultimately going to squeeze the household and cause them to spend less. You add the fact that credit card rates remain elevated, that mortgage rates remain elevated, that you're seeing the shift in interest rates. That's also a squeeze on households, right? So that's one side, one way of thinking about it. That's one argument that some are making, and I've been making that argument. The other side of the picture is to consider that, well, if prices remain elevated and continue to rise, well, maybe inflation expectations will not remain anchored. People, what do I mean by that? I mean, basically, people are going to start to think, well, you know what? If inflation is going to continue to keep rising, maybe I need to go out and spend now and not face higher prices tomorrow or in the future. And so what happens when when people start to think like that, is, well, they go out spending, and that spending causes inflation to increase even more, right? And so there are these two things, these two competing theories right now to consider. And I think more and more people at the Fed are leaning towards, well, household inflation expectations seem to be moving higher. And so we need to be worried about that, because again, if inflation expectations start to move higher, people will go out and spend more now, expecting prices to be higher in the future. And so that's the challenge for policymakers right now. And I think more and more policymakers are really thinking through that second point I'm making, right? That if inflation expectations move higher, they will have to act. For now, they've moved up slightly. I expect the July meeting this week to keep rates, for them to keep rates on hold. But if inflation continues to move higher and that war in the Middle East continues to intensify and oil prices continue to increase, I expect them to start considering a rate hike before the end of the year.
Yeah, and you're looking at CPI somewhat soft in June, but it sounds like you're saying that's not really the consensus that that's going to stick around. That it's just temporary.
It was temporary. Why was it temporary? Because look, we have that oil prices started rising again. And things were moving in the right direction in the Middle East. They're not anymore, right? I heard over the weekend there might have been a little bit of a pause in the fighting, but that's not enough to bring oil prices back down. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the Treasury plans to borrow $671 billion this quarter. If we continue to push fiscal deficits ever higher, it's going to show up. It's basically added demand, right, in the economy, is government spending. And that demand is going to put upward pressure on prices. And I'm not done yet. I mentioned the AI investment boom, right? And that's another demand story. So you got the supply story, right? Supply shocks that are pushing prices higher. You got the demand side of the economy that's pushing prices higher. And that's worrying because it means even if you get rid of the oil shock, inflation may not be returning to 2%, right? To the Fed's target as soon as we thought, as fast as we thought it would.
It's interesting how, we seem to hear about these prices being delayed from when they actually happen. Like, how quick actually does the price of oil feed into that inflationary number? But also something interesting, Orfe, that you've pointed out in recent columns is the shipping methods. And if they have to, move routes around, people are looking at how that adds to the overall cost of energy. What does that do when somebody says, "Hey, we have to add 9 days"?
That's right.
To get around a major strait.
That's right. It's not just the cost of energy, right? It's also the different transportation costs in general. Now you're looking for different ways to get things to you when you have the strait blocked, and so it's also other companies, right? Trucking routes, that are now going to say, well, we have all this demand for stuff to get around, by truck now instead of by ship. And so all of a sudden it's all of this infrastructure and all of these prices that have to go up. And so that's going to affect the price of everything that shows up at your front door, including the food at the grocery store, right? Then there's maybe one more point that I forgot to mention is the fact that there's a recent New York Fed survey that came out and said that roughly half of companies that paid a tariff plan to raise prices, right? Pass on those costs to consumers. They haven't done that yet. And so you have all of these forces that are kind of pushing in the wrong direction. And so unfortunately, that tells me that even if just one of them gets resolved, let's say we get the oil shock, the oil prices coming down, that doesn't get rid of all the other forces at play right now that are keeping inflation elevated.
Orfe, obviously there's going to be much more to come on this issue of the economic impacts of the various pressure points you outlined here, and that's why we bring you Everyday Economics here with the Center Square. Welcome back to the States. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. Data centers are expected to consume extraordinary amounts of electricity in Louisiana, forcing utilities there to build new power plants, transmission lines, and other infrastructure. Now, Entergy Louisiana says that growth will not only simply create new costs, the utility argues its agreements with large data center consumers could ultimately save existing ratepayers about $2 billion over 20 years. But the Center Square Louisiana reporter Nolan McKendry reports consumer advocates argue those savings depend on optimistic assumptions that may not hold true over time. The argument is this: make data centers pay for the costs that they create, then use the additional money they pay as some of Entergy's latest customers to help cover expenses everyone else already shares. Now, Logan Atkinson Burke, executive director of the Alliance for Affordable Energy, said Entergy's projections rely on what she described as very rosy numbers and limited analysis of what would happen if construction costs rise or expected revenues from Meta fall short. Michigan voters will head to the polls next week to determine the outcome of primary races that could determine the balance of power in Congress in November. The Center Square's Andrew Rice reports elections analysts are projecting that several seats in Michigan are toss-ups, which means either party has a decent chance of winning in the congressional district. Here's a look at some of those candidates and also what's going on at the gubernatorial race, with the final push being made to voters in this last week before next week's election. On the Democrat side, Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson's preparing to face off against Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson. For Republicans, U.S. Representative John James, who is holding a firm lead in polling at the beginning of the year, faces off with former State Attorney General Mike Cox and businessman Perry Johnson. Again, that election's coming up Tuesday, August 4th. Two bills at the California State House that seek to further regulate public safety concerns regarding inmates convicted of sex crimes still advancing through the legislature. The Center Square California reporter Madeline Shannon reports Assembly Bill 2727 aims to increase the age to 65 for elderly parole after an inmate has served 25 years of their sentence. It applies to individuals convicted of certain specific sex crimes. Now, that bill is next scheduled to be heard in the Senate Appropriations Committee after the legislature returns from its summer break in August. Now, the other bill, Senate Bill 1446, that aims to make the Board of Parole hearings voting decisions public. That bill also allows for someone convicted of sexually violent crimes to be referred to the board for a sexually violent predator hearing. Both bills are just two in a slew of legislation introduced in California this year that still has yet to make it out all the way. And Democrats' New York Governor Kathy Hochul telling county sheriffs throughout New York that they need to end agreements with ICE to honor civil detainer requests for suspected illegal aliens in response to the state's newly minted restrictions. The Center Square contributor Chris Wade reports that in a letter to a dozen sheriffs across New York, Hochul ordered them to terminate their so-called 287G agreements with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement that allow local cops to deputize by ICE for immigration enforcement to cooperate with ICE. Now, Hochul said the federal civil immigration pacts violate newly signed state laws. The governor demanded that the sheriffs submit documentation verifying that they've terminated the arrangements by August 25th. In June, the Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against New York State challenging the constitutionality of that new law, which lawyers for the DOJ said would make ICE agents and other federal authorities subject to criminal penalties for wearing masks to protect their identity. And that's just some of what America's talking about. Get these and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. You can join us back here Tuesday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all around the country. Only with the States, powered by the Center Square.